Hey everyone, it's 2024, so it's time for an update on my reptile collection. This is the room I keep everything in. This is also my home office, so this wall of cages is my view all day long while I'm working. And that's working with air quotes, obviously. On the other side of the room I have some vision cages and baby racks and grow-up tubs. I'm also building some new 5-foot wide cages that will go on both sides of the window. There was also a large turtle tower right in the middle of the room, but it's gone now and I'll explain that later. I have about 35 snakes right now, plus some babies that are for sale. There's also a leopard gecko in the room, which belongs to my son. Pretty much I have a male and a female of everything. This is frequently called a Noah's Ark style collection. And like Noah, I've also kept lions and elephants and giraffes, but I found that they didn't like being kept in tubs the way that I'd hoped, so I let them go. I'm kind of close to where I plan to go with the total size of the collection, since I do have a limit on the space that I want to work with, as well as limits on the amount of time that I have every week. What you see here takes me about half a day's effort to clean and water, but if you're observant you'll see that there's some wall space that does not yet have any cages, so there may be a few more animals in the future. I make my own cages. One day I'll do a video of that process. For now I'll just say that they are 5-sided wooden boxes made out of 3/4 inch plywood and with sliding glass doors mounted in a wooden frame on the front. One of my favorite things about the setup is that I have lights in all the cages. When I first started keeping reptiles in the 1990s, I had a friend who was the local distributor for vision cages, so I bought a bunch of vision cages from him. I never put lights in them, so the cages were dark, and I kept the animals on newspaper, which obviously isn't very naturalistic looking, so I really didn't like the way they looked. But in the years since, I've built cages and painted the walls white and added LED lighting that comes on during the daytime. Having lights has made all the difference in how much I enjoy the collection. LEDs are cheap and easy to use, so you should really give it a try if you want to get more enjoyment out of seeing your animals. But I recognize that the animals themselves likely don't want to be under bright lights, so I make sure they each have a way to hide. Although some have never used their hides, so the hides were removed. As far as what I'm keeping, I have a pretty even mix of pythons, boas, and colubrids. I don't keep anything venomous, or even rear-fanged venomous. I don't keep any giant snakes, or really anything that's dangerous to humans. And I'm saying that out loud in case any of my neighbors are listening. So let's go through the collection. I'm going to start with pythons of the Morelia complex. This is probably the single biggest family of snakes that I own. These snakes come from Australia and Papua New Guinea. Jungle carpet pythons are some of the first snakes that I got. This female is named Jinx, and I bought her from Tracy Barker of VPI in 1998. She has the big, chunky head that carpet pythons are known for. She was pretty yellow as a juvenile, but as you can see, the yellow has faded, and by the time she was about 10 years old, it had faded into this axanthic look. She also has a stripe running all the way down her spine. Tracy told me that Jinx was the product of some attempts that they were doing at VPI to make striped jungle carpets, but they determined that the trait was not heritable, at least not in a simple way. There's certainly some polygenic behavior happening that causes the pattern though. I wish I knew more about it than that, but I didn't think to get the details back then when I bought her. This male is named Pirate Hans because Pirate Hans is the kind of name you get when you ask your 3-year-old to name a snake for you. This is a good time for me to say that you should never ask your 3-year-old to name a snake for you. They only think of stupid names like Pirate Hans. I've since learned that this snake knows nothing about piracy, and besides, everyone knows that snakes don't have feet. Or Hans. Anyways, I got Pirate Hans in 1999 when he was already a few years old, so I don't know exactly which year he was born in. It would have probably been 1997 at the latest, and maybe a year or two earlier than that. You might think that after living with me for 25 years, that these snakes would be perfectly trustworthy when being handled, but that's not the case. Although I've developed a deep and meaningful relationship with each of them, surprisingly, they still only see me as their food monkey, which is pretty shallow, if I'm being honest. Tarzan is a jungle carpet python that I bought just a few years ago from a local reptile rescue. We believe he was born in about 2015. He was a little hissy and nervous when I first got him, but he has settled down and doesn't get too hot and bothered when I take him out for a handling session. He might just be relaxed being handled because he's happy his name isn't stupid like Pirate Hans. Tarzan got his name when I took him to do an elementary school program and I asked the kids what name I should give him. It's hard to believe it, but Tarzan was the best name they could come up with. Ute is my female jaguar coastal carpet python that I got from Michael Pinnell in 2016. Being a jag, she has moments where she is a little unstable and wobbly, but I almost never see that, and I'm in the room with her all day. Frankly, she's usually out on display a few times a day, stretching across her branches or moving around, and I love seeing her. She's spectacular. I bred her with Tarzan in 2022 when she was 6 years old. She had a small clutch from which 3 babies were born, all of them jags. I plan to repeat the pairing in 2024. Speaking of the jaguar trait, there's an interesting paper that came out that analyzed a similar wobble-like trait in ball pythons. And in the paper, the researchers came to the conclusion that the wobble behavior was not due to faulty neurological development like we used to think, but it was because of differences in the development of the skull in the area where the inner ear is formed. Ute is named after the head stamp she has that reminds me of the logo of a certain university that is nearby here in Utah. The university is renowned for high intellectual accomplishments such as the discovery of cold fusion back in the 1980s, so it's a big honor for her to have their logo branded on her skull. My Centralian pythons, or Bredls pythons, are both pure hypos, from Nick Mutton at Inland Reptile. They are both a little psycho too, which is a bummer because I had always heard that Bredls pythons are some of the calmest of the carpets, and now I've got 2 that aren't exactly trustworthy. Basically, ever since I've brought them home, I've had to remove sharp scissors and matches and other dangerous items that I used to keep freely around the snake room. That's how untrustworthy they are. But they make up for it by just being beautiful animals. They perch on their branches almost every day, and it's hard for me to not want to stop and take a picture each time I pass by. The male is named Baconator. You can tell that I ask my kids way too often to help me name my snakes. Anyways, after he was named Baconator, somehow, in some weird part of the universe, it only made sense to name the female Carbonara. I don't know. But these are part of Nick Mutton's pure hypo line of Bredls, and there is also a 66% chance that Carbonara is het for the stonewash trait. So if you ever want to send me a male stonewash Bredls that we can try out in a breeding experiment, let me know. These videos of them are from late in the year of 2023, and they clearly need larger cages when they come out of brumation in 2024. So I need to stop talking and start building. My Papuan carpet pythons, also known as Irian giant pythons or IJs, also come from Inland Reptile. The female was named Mellow Yellow, which doesn't make any sense because we like to drink Mountain Dew in my house, and the male was named Dr. Pepper. Once again, this naming thing is probably the worst part of the hobby for me. I have a pair of diamond pythons that I'm planning to try breeding in 2025. These are probably my favorite snakes in the whole room. The male is named Xavier and the female is Mystique. The contrast and pattern on diamonds is just amazing. Like the other carpet pythons, these guys are very handleable unless they smell food. One of my sons took an unfortunate feeding response bite from the male that ended up with me prying the snake's teeth from my son's fingers, and my son has been reluctant to handle snakes ever since. So obviously, apart from the possibility of the occasional bloodletting, I think every child should own a diamond python. Before I show off my ball pythons, I feel that I should point out each of these is a world's first. You have to say that anytime you show a ball python on YouTube. I have an albino black pastel, a fire pastel, and a hypo pastel ball python. Plus, there's a male that was produced here several years ago that has found his way back to the collection. He is a pastel black pastel fire. In 2023, I bred the albino black pastel male to the fire pastel female, because their last clutch a couple of years ago produced some pretty interesting babies. But the results of this year's clutch consisted of mostly normals and pastels. And I should probably say that this might have been my last ball python breeding for a very long time, because the market right now is completely saturated with ball pythons. Now let's move on to the colubrids that I own. My Arizona Mountain King snake comes from Idaho, not Arizona. I bought her from Joel Reap at a local reptile show. I've always loved tricolor king snakes, and even spent some time getting a permit a number of years ago to collect one here in Utah, but I struck out on finding one in the wild. So when my son and I were looking at Joel's table at a reptile show, we talked about how fun it would be to get some nice, clean-banded, captive-bred pyro babies, but we weren't ready to drop money on them yet. However, my son spotted this one that has a very badly kinked spine and that Joel was basically giving away and said this was the one he wanted. It was kind of like Charlie Brown picking out that little wooden Christmas tree and taking it home. We named this girl Coconut and have loved keeping her, although I have to wonder what kind of lifespan she's going to have. She's almost 4 years old now and very small, but she eats and defecates just fine, although she's hit and miss sometimes when feeding. Obviously we would never breed her because I can't imagine what the effect of trying to pass eggs would do to her body, but she's interesting enough that I haven't given up on eventually getting some more captive bred Arizona Mountain King someday. My black pine snakes are named Asmodeus and Nightshade. I bought them from the Sutherlands of TSK here in Utah. I have to clarify that because these snakes are listed as threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. So you can't buy or transport them across state lines, but you can purchase them if they are already in the state where you live. These are very cool animals, and it amazes me how much they will calm down and just sit still when you get them out for handling. When I have visitors over and I hand one of these to them, they usually sit on the couch and hang tight just like a ball python does. Not what I expected from them at all. The female has a white patch under her chin, so that's how I tell them apart. On the other end of the handling spectrum are my Chinese king rat snakes. When you think of the Bible stories where Satan is portrayed as being a snake, I think they're talking about Chinese king rat snakes. I'll have to edit this part of the video out in a few years when I'm trying to market babies to sell, but for now I can say that these snakes are pretty much evil incarnate. Well, maybe evil isn't the right word, but they are frequently out cruising their cages during the daytime, especially the female. And when you go anywhere near, they come up to the glass and go on full threat mode, hissing and puffing and gaping their open mouths at you. Then, if you're foolish enough to slide the glass doors open, they launch at you. It's pretty fun. I've named the male Cruelty, and the female is named Malice. Lord of the Rings fans might recognize that these were the traits that Sauron poured into the One Ring to rule them all. So, why keep snakes that are very defensive like these? Well, first of all, they are absolutely beautiful animals, and because they come out and move around during the daytime, I get to see them a lot. Secondly, there is something to be said about handling animals that have a little more spice to them than a ball python. The adrenaline goes up and you never know how the handling session will turn out. I mean, it will turn out that you will be bleeding, but you don't know exactly where you will be bleeding from. That's the exciting part. In all fairness, Cruelty, the male, doesn't typically go for a bite when I take him out of the cage. He's more of a make threats and then run away kind of animal, but Malice will stick her teeth into any part of you that she can get to. For a while I would record all of our handling sessions with a GoPro on my chest, with the idea that I would get her out once a week for 5 minutes and record and count the number of times that she bit me during each 5-minute session. And the idea was to see if the number of bites decreased with time. But I gave up on this after 3 months of tests and finding that there was no decrease at all in the number of bites. The obvious next step for me was to minimize our handling to reduce her stress, and just let her live with as little human contact as possible. I still have to get her out occasionally though for brumation or cage cleaning, but that's it. She's going to be a lot of fun when she's 7 or 8 feet long. Eastern king snakes have been one of my favorites since I was a kid growing up in Virginia, when me and my friends would hunt for snakes. So as an adult I've had several Eastern king snakes, and right now I have a pair of them. There's LOL, my female, and Blister, the male. Please learn from my mistakes as I point out that LOL is, well, she's thick, as the kids would say. I admit that I have sometimes used her as a garbage disposal for the mice and rats that other snakes didn't eat. So as a result, she's a lot fatter than she should be. To try and remedy this, I've reduced her food intake to just 1 meal per month for the last year, and I intend to keep doing that for a time. But the damage may be done already. I've been wanting to breed LOL, so in 2022 I acquired Blister. He came from a source that I didn't really want to buy from, a wholesaler. But it has been hard to find adult or subadult Eastern Kings that, 1, don't come from some state back east where they are native animals and the person probably isn't allowed to be catching and selling them, or 2, they have lots of broken chains around their bodies, or the chains are too thin or too thick for my liking. So Blister was the best I could do and I bought him. Little did I know that Blister would develop blisters. It turns out he came in with snake fungal disease, or SFD. To be fair, SFD is increasing in wild populations of snakes from the eastern United States, and I was reasonably certain the Blister was wild caught before I bought him. So it wasn't necessarily the fault of the seller, but once the blisters began appearing on him in early 2023, I extended his quarantine period for the remainder of the year while he got treatment from a local reptile vet. By the end of the summer, the blisters had ceased, but he is still in quarantine today, 16 months after I acquired him. So we'll see how he looks in a couple of months when I decide whether or not it's safe to pair him with LOL. I have one gray-banded king snake, although I would not mind at all getting more. This is 16 Lasers, another animal I picked up from Joel Reap at Prismatic Reptiles. Again with the names, he has 16 orange bands along the length of his body, so yet another one of my kids named him. 16 Lasers is another snake that I have health concerns about. When he was about 4 years old, he developed a large swelling towards his cloaca, and that swelling has never decreased. He's been to the vet, and there wasn't anything readily apparent about the problem, so I've tried giving him warm baths and massages in case it was a lodged piece of substrate, but nothing has worked. In the several years since then, the swelling has not gone away, yet he eats and defecates like normal. I'm assuming he won't live a long life, but he's a joy to have around, and he's almost always the favorite snake when guests come over. This is our albino Hognose snake. Like so many others in the collection, his name took some real thought and effort to come up with. Basically, we happened to stop at Burger King on our way to pick him up from the breeder, and by the time we got home, his name was Whopper. Whopper is from Joey Muggleston of Great Basin Serpentarium. He's in a cage with fairly deep substrate, and he typically spends about 6 days a week down in the tunnels he's made, and then surfaces once every week or two to see if it's feeding day. I've given up trying to get him to eat off of tongs, even when he is up and on the surface. Instead, he and I have an agreement that I leave a dead mouse laying across a particular part of the branches in his cage, and he'll come get it when he's good and ready. I love Honduran milk snakes and own a pair of them. The big one is Saturka, an albino that is also het hypo. She's a pickup from TSK at the Wasatch Reptile Expo many years ago. 2023 was an eventful year for Saturka and me. If you look at the cages that I have, you can see some white round plastic louvers that serve as coverings for the ventilation holes. I've learned over the years that the glue I used when I put these in is not very strong, and a number of snakes have pushed the louvers out. Fortunately, most of the snakes that are strong enough to push them out are also too big to climb through the holes. But one morning I came in, saw a louver on the ground, and then saw that Saturka had pushed hers out and fled. I have a security camera on top of the cages, and when I pulled the video from it after the escape, I found a couple of clips from the middle of the night that show Saturka moving around on top of the wall of cages. And even though I had meticulously closed up all of the gaps and corners so that nothing can get behind the cages, I completely overlooked some openings in the ceiling where I had intended to install surround sound speakers. A couple of them were open, and I quickly assumed that Saturka made her way through there and into the ceiling. The only good thing about snake escapes is that as long as they stay somewhere in the house, they eventually get too dehydrated and seem to give themselves up and make themselves findable. This has happened to me in the past, and it happened with Saturka. After about 6 weeks on the run, I found her sitting out in the open, all worn out and ready for a drink. I replaced all of her louvers using 2-part epoxy this time to keep them in place. I have also bought a male Honduran milk snake. This is Sunka, and he was a trick to find because I wanted one that was a wild type in appearance, but het for albino and also aneurysm. I was fortunate enough to find Sunka, who is het for albino and hypomelanism, which I'm not that interested in, but there's also a 50% chance he's het for aneurysm. So that means I can complete my set of Hondurans by getting a female that is aneurystic and by breeding her to Sunka. That would be way cool if he was het for all 3 recessive traits. And our final colubrid is Grit, a Great Basin gopher snake and the only native Utah snake I own. Gopher snakes are plentiful in Utah, and in my opinion they make the best pet snake for those who just want to go and catch a pet snake around here. They're generally very calm snakes that rarely bite, they get to be a pretty impressive size, and they'll happily eat mice and rats that you can buy from the pet store. We found Grit when we were driving around in the Jeep up in the mountains nearby, and since I frequently go to schools and scout meetings to show the local kids reptiles, I felt like we needed one token animal from Utah to show people what they were likely to see when they were out hiking around. The last group of snakes to cover are boas, of which I keep 3 species. The most important boas for me are my Dumerils boas. These are native to the island of Madagascar. I acquired mine from Gary Sipperly back in 2000. When I saw them on his table at the San Diego Reptile Show, I was fascinated by their pattern, so I bought a pair and brought them home. They are named Moose and Cuddles. Moose is my largest snake at over 7 feet long and more than 20 pounds. He's always been the calm one, so he frequently shows up when I do reptile presentations or post a video with him draped over a child. Cuddles was, and still is, a little more unpredictable in behavior. She's definitely mellowed with age though. She has produced 7 litters of young in the 24 years that I've had her, but when she produced her 8th litter last year in 2023, the babies were all stillborn, so she may be done being a mama. I've only been breeding her every other year, so she'll take 2024 off, and then I'll think about whether to give her one more go in 2025. I'm not really inclined to breed her again though, because she's such an awesome animal and I really want her to be here for another decade or more. Besides Moose and Cuddles, I have 2 female Dumerils that were born to them a few years ago. They are Snuggles and Wiggles. I chose those two because in the litter she was born in, Snuggles had deep, dark brown saddles that was unlike any others in the litter. And in her litter, Wiggles had the brightest coloring. But honestly, I've seen other really amazing offspring that Cuddles has produced, and I've just sold them off to happy people. I've always loved Brazilian rainbow boas and got my first one in the 1990s, but I have to say that I had difficulties with the ones that I kept 20 or so years ago because they got respiratory infections, presumably from the dry environment we have here in Utah. I'm hoping that my animal husbandry has improved enough that I can make another go of it, so I'm slowly inching back into it with a female Brazilian rainbow that I bought from Dave Culling last year. I've named her Iris, and so far as I stare at the data that I read off of the Govee device that is in the cage with her, she's getting the right temperatures, medium to high humidity, and there's a fan blowing air slowly through the cage that she is in. So fingers crossed I'm getting it right this time. Also, I'm on the lookout for a nice looking male, so maybe I'll be adding him in 2024. The third of the boa species that I keep are Boa Imperator, or common boas. I have 4 of these. The older pair are both sharp-strain albinos, but my female is also an anery, and the male is also hypo and het for anery, so they are a pair that I'm trying to get offspring from. They are both very docile, and I've loved owning them. I'm not always a fan of albino snakes, but the female, with the uninspired name of Blizzard, is just stunning in person. The male too, named Crush, has the most beautiful orange and yellow scales. When they're moving around in and out of their dark substrate, they are so beautiful to look at. The other pair that I have are both VPI T-positive albinos, and they are both RC pastels. And I can say this with certainty because I bought them both directly from Richard. These two have incredible color and markings, and even though I was late discovering and keeping boa constrictors, these guys are such a thrill to own and keep. As far as the remaining reptiles in my room, I feel like I need to say something about the eastern box turtles that I had kept for a few years, but that I sold off in 2023. I was really excited when a group of them became available locally. Unfortunately, I found that I did not have a great situation here for keeping them outdoors for most of the year, which I think they deserve. The place that I set up for them got way too hot, and so after a few years of trying to remedy it with indoor housing, I finally decided I wasn't doing them any favors with my husbandry, and so I sold them to people who are keeping them outdoors. So unfortunately I don't have them now, but you know, it's one of those things where if we were to ever move and have a big yard, I think we'd get another group of eastern box turtles so that I could wax nostalgic for my childhood all over again. And the final mention goes to our leopard gecko, Sunset. This is my son's gecko, and it's the first time I've ever lived with a leopard gecko. I'm used to the green iguanas that I tried keeping when I was young, and the flighty lizards that we see outdoors here in the Rocky Mountains. So it's been really amazing to me to have this totally calm, completely lovable leopard gecko hanging around with me in my office all day. He is the chillest animal ever. In addition to Sunset, my son has also bought 2 female leopard geckos and bred them with Sunset. The first one produced multiple clutches of eggs, and we hatched the most adorable little geckos from them. But then the mom passed away unexpectedly. We weren't sure what caused it, but in hindsight I believe it was due to insufficient levels of calcium in her body because we weren't supplementing her food with enough calcium. She had it dusted on her feeder insects occasionally, but I've since learned that when breeding these, the keeper needs to be really intentional in supplying egg-bearing female leopard geckos with plenty of calcium. And unfortunately, we didn't know that before making a second attempt with a different female that we bought and paired with Sunset. She too passed away at a young age during her first season of egg production. So for now, we're not going to subject any more animals to our care. We're just happy with Sunset. That's an introduction to my reptile collection. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. I also have other videos that you can check out, and I plan to make more and do it with some consistency going forward. Thanks for watching.